I
Mr. Landon. Oh, hi, Aaron.
I just got off a Clubhouse meeting with Tom Arnold, so it probably still kind of looks to them like I'm listening and I'm there, but I'm not. Because I just have to stop it, because otherwise I'll keep talking and dominate the conversation. Because I have so many opinions about gun violence in America, and the Clubhouse is supposed to be more broadly, how do people feel about the presidential address? How do they feel about what Joe Biden said? And I was asleep, being on the other side of the world. I was, well, having a nap at that point in time. But I've looked up on the internet what he said, and that Lauren Boebert, for example, rolled her eyes when he mentioned working to lower the cost of prescription drugs. I've heard that he placed a very strong emphasis on reducing gun violence in the US. So understanding that it's hard to eliminate it, but really noting the statistics and that America can do better. We don't have to be this surrendered to a very vocal minority interest group that is threatening the emotional stability of American children and stealing lives from people and loved ones from people. So Alan's here. Hello, Alan. Nice to see you. And Knowledge El Shabazz is here saying hello from Lynchburg. Hello, Knowledge. Lovely to see you too. So I hear that it's such a good speech that even Chris Wallace from Fox acknowledged that he thinks that will be a popular speech with Americans, which brings me to my point that it's great to have a nationwide address in that way, because it gives more middle of the road, it gives the American middle an opportunity to hear a political address from a responsible adult who speaks clearly and evocatively and honestly to the problems that America contends with and to the challenges that it faces, if you want to phrase the word problems in a more inviting way. America's all about bringing so many people on board because the current system is set up to require a supermajority to get anything done. A Republican agenda is much simpler. They could just use that whole budget reconciliation dodge to get through their only agenda, which was give the wealthy a massive tax cut, give tax cuts for owning private jets, write in some tax cuts for the middle class with a written expiry date in a few years after, so that then taxes go up and they can blame any Democrats who've managed to be elected. Lots of ways for continuing to produce American voters, meaning betray. Because even people who vote for Republicans, they still want workers to have rights to a degree. They just are more animated often by culture war issues. So being concerned that Democrats will allow for women to exercise bodily autonomy when they've been religiously conditioned to think that that is evil and potentially even demonic. And what else do they want? Well, they might believe more strongly that freedom means businesses having the unconstrained ability to do whatever they like. But you can actually find common ground with them when you talk about issues like factory polluting local communities. And then you might go, oh yeah, they would prefer for there to be some degree of regulation of businesses if they personally are told that they're going to live near a toilet paper production outlet, that if there's regulation in place, they won't poison their children and won't give them cancer with various carcinogens and neurotoxins introduced into the environment. So there's more common ground when people actually hear what you have to say. But as everybody knows, a significant problem in the US is the silos of conservative media. So mainstream media bends over backwards a lot of the time to cater to right-wing perspectives because they've been so worked by the refs, as it were. They've been so criticized for being left when it just so happens that the center left and that the left is more reality-based than the right in the US because it's less lobby interest perverted. It's more just this is how things are. These are the threats we face. We've got to contend with climate change. We have to contend with labor market issues. We have to make our workforces more resilient so that we can shift people into good paying jobs and out of fossil fuel industry jobs. So yes, Alan notes that the audience was pretty sparse and apparently Republicans had better things to do. Republicans have that difficult challenge, don't they, of not having facts to work with, only having culture war battles to work with. So for Joe Biden to have the floor and to get to speak directly to the American people, all they can do is pretend that he's boring and to pander to people's fear that when we try to be honest about racist dynamics at play in the US, on the challenges of racism and the legacy and the impact of racism, that people fear that they will be collectively punished for something they don't feel like that they've personally done or personally benefited from. So Republicans can draw on that concern, that fear that if they admit there is racism in America, that there will be some kind of Old Testament retribution that they're opening themselves up to. So Alan sent an Appreciate Award. I just saw that flash up. Thank you, Alan. And I can see Marsha's here saying hello and Molly's here waving too. Nice to see you both. And thank you for the Appreciate Award. How's that Clubhouse going? Still there. But the good thing is that they don't know that I'm being very quiet, not just because I'm humble, but because I'm doing a broadcast. I didn't want to start it too late. Tom Arnold is on the broadcast. I think Phil followed me over to watch the Clubhouse broadcast, and they are having an interesting discussion, but I'm so impatient with it because I'm not raised in American morals and American sensibility. So I don't want to be polite and hear everybody else's point of view because I'm so frustrated with conservatives, and I'm so frustrated with the fact that other nations, other wealthy, prosperous nations, have been able to take action against their challenges in relation to gun crimes. So there was a mass shooting in which children were killed in Scotland. They took action. There was a mass killing in Australia in which children were harmed. They took action. Harm to children is often what spurs people to get enough collective energy and momentum to overcome the obstacles of vested interest inertia. And yeah, so I was definitely blabbing away on that Clubhouse as if it was my own private broadcast, which it's not, and I know it's not. I can listen to Tom Arnold talk because he's an advocate for change, and he speaks about how he's been to Afghanistan and he's seen firsthand the size of the holes in people's bodies as a consequence of being hit with bullets and semi-automatic weapon. He speaks passionately to the fact that nobody needs a semi-automatic weapon for hunting. It's a human hunting weapon, that whole class of weaponry. And if you buy a semi-automatic weapon, that there's modification things you can buy easily to turn it into an automatic weapon that no human has a chance against. Even police officers who turn up to a mass shooting, they are also losing their lives. So that's where I want to make a linguistic tweak. Instead of saying, oh, they lost their lives or they gave their lives, people who get shot by other people are not surrendering their lives or handing it over on a platter. They are having their lives taken from them. They're standing up to do the right thing and to protect others, but they're not saying, I give my life in exchange for theirs. They're saying, I'm putting my courage on the line. I understand there's risks involved, but they don't want to die. That's not the terms of the exchange they're offering. Clubhouse, Alan, is an app that's getting a lot of traction on the internet because it's very suited to the terms of a pandemic, even the downward slope of a pandemic. Touch wood. Because it allows people to congregate in conversations that aren't recorded, so people don't have to be so cautious or worry that they can't speak their mind without being scrutinized and criticized and cancelled. You just have these immediate conversations. You can hook up with people from all over the world. Moderators get together a room and everybody's just in the room in an audio sense. So it's very important to turn take, and moderators are often the people with power and sometimes celebrities or leaders in their field that start rooms, and then they can invite people in to speak and say, oh, you can press a button that says you raise your hand to speak. And if you've been waiting patiently for a while, they might let you. So it's something that's very appealing to someone like me to say, oh, I can be in conversations with real Americans, but it's meant that, we're all on a fairly equal footing of just getting to speak and have to take turns. So it puts me up against the limitations of my character, which is I'm quite overbearing in a verbal sense, but also very impatient with people who don't recognize that it's not just a question of complaining and saying, oh, well, why can't more people understand that gun violence is bad? Because plenty of people in America do understand that gun violence is bad. There's 7% of people, I think, who agree that background checks should be made more secure, that there should be a stronger, tighter system of background checks, and that loopholes to evade background checks should be closed, and that those laws should be enforced, and that there should be some overall national system because if there are variations on a state by state level, then people can cross state borders with weapons they've purchased in a different state. Say Chicago, Illinois, that has relatively strict gun laws, but the neighboring states don't. So people can easily import guns into Chicago. And I guess what's notable about Chicago is there is high concentrations of people. I'm not even going to call them poor. I'm going to say as a community, at a collective level, they have been excluded from economic opportunities. Edward Lynn is here and is concerned that I've been ignoring him because I didn't answer his very, to him, important question where he asks how many lives are saved every year because of a firearm. So this is the point at which I show you the relative homicide rates from around the world, Edward, because research shows there are very, very few lives saved every year because of a firearm. So you've got a big inflated perception of how many lives firearm saves. That's your emotions fueling that perception, Edward, and not data. And if you actually make an effort to look at data that's not constructed by some perverted, deceitful liars from the NRA, you won't have to buy into that destructive, irresponsible bullshit anymore. So thanks for asking that question. Thanks for participating in the chat. But if you want to be more respectful of the freedom of Americans in a general sense and more protective of American safety, both the safety of America's children, many of whom are being emotionally harmed by the prevalence of not only mass murder through gun violence, but just losing relatives and loved ones and their own lives to incidents that center around an unsecured gun. So children who kill themselves or kill their friends or family members or injure themselves because there was an unsecured weapon left in their vicinity. When I was talking about bringing my children to the US, somebody advised me that in some schools they will give parents a heads up ahead of gun drill days where students are compelled to rehearse what it would be like to hide from a man with a weapon who's hunting you to try and injure and kill you. And they advise parents to pack a change of clothes for the children because the children often wet themselves the first time they are compelled to participate in that type of gun drill. So I'm really comfortable with calling people on the right out for their complicity with this destructive pattern in American life, that the freedom of so many is compromised by the bad ideas, the stubborn adherence to terrible, irresponsible ideas on the part of a subset of gun owners. And it's a subset because there's a plentiful number of gun owners who want there to be stronger common sense gun safety laws. And I'm always going to use that phrase, common sense gun safety laws to linguistically emphasize the fact that it's the majority of Americans who oppose that gun worshipping bullshit that is the product of highly paid disinformation campaigns from very, very antisocial, self-serving gun manufacturing interests. It's as wicked as the people who worked in cigarette companies and still do to try and push cigarettes to children or to push cigarettes to adults who will then face an increased likelihood of slow death from lung cancer. Now, look, not all instances of lung cancer relate to cigarette smoke. Some relate to pollution and other things. There's not just one cause for lung cancer, but at the same time, it was very irresponsible of cigarette companies, and continues to be irresponsible of cigarette companies to push their products, to pursue profit at the expense of the health and well-being of humans. And if you can recognize that it took a long time for there to be concerted pushback, that there were lots of doctors and researchers who understood that cigarette smoking was not 100% guaranteed, but was an increased likelihood of a long, protracted, painful death sentence. For that push to reach critical mass, to actually then achieve something, to achieve a reduction in advertisements for cigarettes, for advertisements directed to children, advertisements directed towards adults, which has made a difference in smoking rates. And so it hasn't eliminated smoking, but it's made fewer Americans have to die that slow, painful death and to be taken too soon from their loved ones when they could enjoy years more of happy family life. So someone called Daniel's here and says, hi, Dav. Hi, Daniel. Edward says, wow, I'm not a gun owner. Well, no shit, Sherlock. No shit. I have to practice not swearing, don't I? Phil says Dav was the star of the room. Succinct, focused, and articulate. Oh, my Lord. That helps me so much, Phil, because I was actually feeling a little bit worried that I was overbearing, because I am overbearing with my opinions, and Clubhouse has taught me that I'm going to struggle a little bit. It's good for me to know my challenges, good for me not to hide from them. But when I go to the US, there's going to be a lot of expectation that I be polite to people and that I let conservatives have the floor and that I let them defend gun proliferation. So the thing that I'll try and remember to keep myself contained and to make space for me to listen to other people, even if I've already internally written them off as being dumbasses who pander to bullshit conservative ideas. The key thing for me to remember is you can't just rush pell-mell ahead with your own thoughts, because there's a thing that's important, and that thing is called the law of unintended consequences. That if you get so passionate and so carried away with a solution to a problem and you don't listen to other perspectives, that sometimes there's unintended consequences that you don't get adequately warned about. And I know many people hated the last season of Game of Thrones. So plug your ears just for a few seconds if you don't want to hear a spoiler alert. Plugging, because the spoiler to that is that the heroine of some of the first seasons of that show began to pursue power and began to pursue her solution without caring anymore for the ways in which she might be hurting others. And she eventually ended up committing mass murder and couldn't be held to account for it. She would hear no pushback to the fact that she was just killing a lot of people. She was like, well, they should have known better. They had it coming. So then her boyfriend had to stab her in order to bring her bloody reign to an end. Now, the point I'm pushing with that is the law of unintended consequences, that if you don't take advice and you become addicted to glorifying your own power and revering yourself for your own good intentions, you can become tyrannical also. That all humans are susceptible to tyrannical impulses, and that war is something that should always be approached with caution and with lots of good advice and careful thinking. Well, the person who I wasn't really listening to anymore because of their gun commentary managed to say, "Have a great evening. Thank you for sharing your broadcast." So I appreciate that he was able to say that. Daniel's here and says hello from Cleveland, which is nice. Although Daniel also concerningly says ha 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 ha, which to me is a red flag for a troll. So maybe you're just genuinely having a happy moment, but yeah. Now, Molly notes that she's a gun owner, but AR-15s are weapons used to clear large swathes of humans. Yes, it's a weapon of war. And no citizen needs to own one. We have the Army, Navy, Air Force, and National Guard to protect us here. It's true. There's a mythology around the idea that American democracy is reliant on gun ownership from individuals, that's the only safeguard America needs to have against tyranny is lots of people with guns, so that if the government is ever tyrannical, individual citizens can rise up and shoot their way through a tyrannical government, Rambo style. And we saw what happens with that idea. We saw what happens with that idea on January the 6th, that's how people thought they were combating tyranny. They were misled people. They had been fed a diet of lies for months about how the election was conducted, and that it's not really a stable or well thought out approach to combating tyranny to have an armed population. I mean, those people couldn't even bring their weapons to the Capitol because there's laws in Washington, D.C., but if they had, yes, that would not have been good people defending democracy. That would have been bamboozled people killing police officers and legislators in order to restore a tyrant to power who had been evicted by at least enough sensible voters who understood the nature of the threat that a Trump presidency posed on a continuing basis to the American people, that they were dying as a result of his negligence and callousness and outright murderous depravity. So, yes. And Phil notes that there was a police officer in the Boulder shooting called Eric Talley. He was a highly trained good guy with a gun, but he was killed, wasn't he? He died, and that's because that whole gun ownership argument of a good guy with a gun is the only thing to stop a bad guy with a gun, that requires escalation for everybody to walk around with semi-automatic weapons. All right, well, I'm going to go. It's a brief show, which is good for me because I have to find more ways of making an impact, and I'm going to maybe go back onto that Clubhouse thing. So if you join Clubhouse, my name on the platform is just Dav, I think, and DAV, and I'm going to go back and join that room and see how they're going. I feel like it's cool that I have people who can vouch for me as an interested party. Molly notes that the NRA's main goal is to scare citizens into thinking they need several weapons to protect themselves from other citizens. There's a lot of underlying racism in their messages too. Yes, they definitely feed into a lot of misconceptions, and it's a two-pronged situation. There's people's appetite for racist messaging, and then the well-funded nature and driven, motivated, gun profiteering nature of that mythology being fed into, that mythology that Americans need to protect democracy through gun ownership. All the people who've looked at the standoffs with police officers, or federal agents rather, such as Waco. Is it Waco in Texas or Waco? Probably Waco. David Koresh and a cult that were amassing weapons. So federal agents surrounded the compound and there was a gunfight. To me, that highlights gunfights are bad. Private citizens owning guns can easily get out of control because of the human tendency to fall for cultish bad ideas. Humans have powerful imaginations. It lets us architecturally design wonders of the world, but it also lets us find community and solidarity in a shared belief in some pretty imaginative, whacked out ideas. I'm thinking of Scientology, but a whole bunch of ideas that aren't really grounded in reality, but become a way for human bonding. And people love the closeness of cults. It's just that closeness often devolves into, or pretty much always devolves into, abuse of power that often ends up in the sexual abuse and exploitation of women and girls, but also boys and men as well. Bushra is here and says hello. Hello. So Knowledge says, thanks for sharing. Molly gives me a great reporting award. Thank you. Even gun experts will tell you that a mass shooter will target the people with guns first. Yes, and they have the element of surprise on their side. Alan thanks me for the earlier broadcast. You're welcome, Alan. I hope to see you at a similar time, if not earlier, tomorrow. I did learn from Clubhouse that to build a community, you really need regularity of time. You need consistency. That's how people know to plan ahead and join and be with a group of friends and share a broadcasting situation that they all enjoy or find a measure of community with. So community's fine. Cults are the bad end of the continuum on it. And I'm not building a cult. I'm building an audience that is also a community. So Marsha just gave me the Newsworthy Award. Thank you, Marsha. Much appreciated. I'm giving military salutes as if I'm adopting the symbology of war, because I am a little bit. As I made the point before, other nations have responded rapidly at a legislative level to gun violence against children. And America hasn't done that, meaning there's a lot of burnt out, disaffected people who say Congress doesn't work. Our system is broken. And that's true. There are elements of brokenness in America's system that won't change until a supermajority of people has mobilized around what needs to be done. That it needs to be identified that there is a minority, a vocal, passionate minority that is bullying the rest of America, and that they have been catered to by some baked-in fault lines into the American system of government, which Americans are rightly proud of and has been an example for the rest of the world. But it caters to slave owners and people who think like slave owners. And there's still a strong element of that thinking prevalent in American society now, and it holds America back. So that baked-in slave owner thinking is what stops America from having common sense gun safety laws at a federal level, because there's been so much pushback from people who ally themselves with a slave owner mentality of fearing an uprising from Black Americans that feels the need to maintain the social order of white dominance through gun proliferation. Not to say that Black people don't own guns, but the vocal executives, the Wayne LaPierres of the world, the Ted Cruzes saying, you can't take our guns over my cold dead body, will you take our guns? Those people are white, and those people subscribe to a lot of racist ideas. Perry Pilots has got to get this off my chest. I'm not an American, so apologies to Americans in advance. Gun culture is barbaric, and NRA messaging is an insult to intelligent people everywhere. I don't feel safe visiting there anymore, so we'll be avoiding as much as I can and telling people I know to do the same. Well, I'm sure it does impact on tourism that there's so many gun shootings that make the news. And of course, many more mass gun shootings don't even make the news anymore. But the rest of the world does hear. It is a story, an international story, that America is beset by gun violence, and that it often is beset by its own limitations, in that its legislators seem to act as if their hands are tied. And that's because, in the sense of many Republican politicians, their hands are tied by NRA funding. Molly has a good point to suggest that I post when my next broadcast will be. HAPS has a way to do that so that my subscribers know. Thank you so much, Molly. That is a point that I'll just need to find out how to do that. There's like a pre-live button you can push. If I give people a heads up, that will really work and help me while I still struggle with being consistent with times. Marsha understands Perry Pilot's point, but she feels safe. There have been mass shootings in most every other country at some point. Sure, but Marsha, we didn't have any mass shootings in Australia, which has 21 million people. So are there 21 million people in Texas? Say Australia has 21 million. Actually, it's probably more like 27 million right now. Let me check. We haven't had any mass shootings since 1996. 25 million now. Okay. And we had one familial mass shooting last year that was the first in 20 years. Over 20 years, because a farmer who was allowed to own a rifle shot everybody in his family, which was about 4 people. So that was the first mass shooting we'd had since 1996. And so Australians feel safe on a better basis, because that gun violence is impacting more and more American states. More and more American states have high instances of mass shootings, relatively high. True, not Australia, but Marsha's point is that she doesn't walk around thinking that she will be shot. Fair. Robert's got to go. Thank you, Robert. I'm saying goodbye to everybody. Thank you so much for the awards, and yep, take care. Thank you so much. Hope to see you again soon. And Molly, I'll get on that idea of a pre-broadcast announcement so that subscribers get an alert of some kind saying DavCat's going to be on. And I'll just show you this particular troll. This style of argumentation is called reductio ad absurdum. So he's trying to make fun of me for advocating for common sense gun safety laws by taking a more extreme position than I adopt. So it's a straw man argument, reductio ad absurdum. It's irresponsible and childish of him to do that, because guns, or people, are using guns to inflict domestic terrorism on the people of the United States. That even if Marsha feels safe walking around on a day-by-day basis, people are feeling more concerned that they'll be shot in malls, in churches, in movie theaters, because the incidence of mass shooting is escalating, and it's too high. The homicide rate in America is 5 times that of the homicide rate in Australia. Our suicide rates, I think, are reasonably comparable, but the homicide rate is too high, and it's a function of the overprevalence of guns, which in and of itself is a function of the legacy of slave-owning mentality. So see ya, Knowledge, see ya, Marsha and Molly and Robert and Alan and Perry Pilot, and thank you and Daniel. Oh, thank you, Daniel. Thank you, everybody, for being here today, and Phil. And take care, everybody. Hope to see you again sooner rather than later. Yes, Marsha absolutely is an advocate for gun reform. She just wanted to say she was not as concerned as Perry Pilot was, who just doesn't even ever want to visit America again, because that association now in many people's minds is so powerful from consuming media stories that rightly draw attention to the day-to-day events in America where there's this pattern of mass shootings. So see ya. Thanks. Mwah. Thank you, Marsha, Molly, Knowledge, everybody. Thank you so much for being here today. Take care and talk to you soon.